My talk will include the original play by Hauptmann as well as the filmic adaptation and move to my musicologist's point of view in examining the new score written for the restoration. One could argue we have 2.5 adaptations. I would say we have 3 adaptations, different interpretations of one historic happening. Thus, we are dealing with 4 different layers of time. The original mutiny happened in 1844 at the peak of the early industrialization, shortly before the Industrial Revolution started around the second half of the 19th century. The play by Gerhard Hauptmann occurred in 1892 in the Wilhelm II era. Then the filmic adaptation was made in 1927 in the Weimar Republic by the director Frederic Zelnik, former known for his light comedies. And finally the new score was written for the Arte Restoration program by Johannes Kalitzke in 2011-12. So how we will proceed. First I want to tell something about Hauptmann in the context of his own time, before I'm referring to different cultural and artistic developments at the beginning of the 20th century, which will also include the film. Then I will move to the musical analysis and conclude with how this new music is entering a dialogue with the old pictures and therefore establishes a new form of audiovisual dialectic. Looking at early biographical key data, it is to know that in Gerhard Hauptmann's own ancestor history there were Silesian weavers. So, like most of his work, also the weavers was inspired by autobiographical interests, which leads to another interest of Hauptmann, the naturalism, which is a literal translation of real life happenings. So attitude, custom and habit of the time is transferred linguistically to a literal form, which is somehow denying the literal tradition of circling around so-called important figures, but is concentrating on everyday life of everyday workers. And then again, in this case, is transferred back to a 5-acts-based dramatic form. Looking to important naturalistic works of literature before the weavers, needless to say, already in Hauptmann's own work there were 2 main works, Bahnwärter Thiel and Das Friedensfest, which also pointed out to the ordinary life. And in the literal innovations in the work of Johannes Schlaf was the foreshadowing with language what we call slow motion. So he described as detailed as possible processes, and similar development of language was found in France at this time in the poems by Mallarmé. Of course, Mallarmé, with his symbolistic point of view, had another approach to language. He wanted language to regain qualities he found to be lost to music, or given away to music, qualities of imagination and spatialization. Back to Hauptmann. One thing that, though, differs from the weavers and all prior works of naturalism is that there is no longer one single protagonist in the center of the tale, but the individuum is abstracted to the mass. And thinking of the Russian Revolution film, it is no wonder and might be hopefully new to some of you that the Weavers was adapted already by the former theater director and filmmaker Bąk Tomaszewski in 1918, who placed the plot of the Weavers into the happenings of the Russian Revolution 1917. So already the first new interpretation, and proved that very early the Russian cinematic language welcomed the portrayal of the social and revolutionary synergies by dialectic language. Now, to already come to the middle of the first half of my paper, I want to make a preliminary recapitulation and foreshadowing of important terms and referring to different artistic and revolutionary intersections happened at the beginning of the 20th century. First of all, it is known that the naturalism was regarded as a revolution of the theatrical language. So it shocked in a certain way the audience in Berlin, and especially the high-ranked audience. So no, it is no wonder that Heide Schlüppmann stated that the development of the Autorenfilmer, the independent film writer, went hand in hand with journalistic qualities to observe social issues, and that these writers, mostly Democrats, of course didn't fear workers' movements which occurred, which were inspired by the writings. And this performative and linguistic tool to point out to the ordinary was then transferred by cinematic language to the tool of montage, which subconsciously implemented some cultural connotation. I will come to this topic of montage later on. And of course there is another revolution at this time, beginning the destabilization of harmonic and melodic groundings in the music, which yet needed to last until 1945, till it reached its today's known political connotation after the catastrophe of the Second World War. I want to now go a little bit deeper into the media revolution and explaining why I'm so insisting on the term of naturalism, because what the language tried to do then became reality in the photographic and phonographic possibility to record life and to record real events. This media revolution was one of the ending points of the Industrial Revolution, and backwaved synergies that were produced by the industrialism in the first place by portraying it. So, speaking of the Lumiere brothers, the cinematograph was a tool, investigative tool to record life, more a cinema of objectiveness than a cinema of attraction. Our colleague speaker, Vincent Seliger, spoke of cinema as the last frame, the last judge of reality. So we saw it on the screen, it must be true then. And this is the tricky part. When we speak about the silent cinema, we have to imagine us as the spectators of the silent cinema. Which means we have always a communal experience of cinema, and the informations on the screen are regarded not only as plot devices, but regarded also as informations of value, as like the cinema screen can be a sort of extended newspaper to project reality. And there is another development of projection, the psychoanalysis, which also used latent dream imagery to explain certain behavior systems, but the difference to cinema is cinema speaks to many at the same time. So cinema does, via group dynamic, accumulate suggestive forces. Speaking of psychology and looking what history books are saying about the events that led to the workers' mutinies, I see no way the single worker was able to psychologically intellectualize the situation he was put in. They were confronted, even if they were confronted with an urgent need, with an existential urgency to be dealt with. And we all, as film and media researchers, have this problem when we are referring to some historic circumstances, to historic happenings. We always have to differentiate the different artistic prisms, glasses, and filters through which these happenings are mirrored. And this mirroring is always relying on the time it is made, and it's always relying on the special referential system of culture it is embedded in. And even the literature it is written about, the art which is about historic events, has to be differentiated, because it's also embedded in the historic and cultural connotation it was written. So it's very complicated, and this just I wanted to point out. And so what is the result that a play of Hauptmann, based on a revolt which was not very much welcomed by the hierarchy, by the Emperor Wilhelm, was so successful in the Weimar Republic, also as a play and also as a film. There are different voices. I really cannot tell yet what I make out of these voices. Kalitzke told that the Nazis tried already to manipulate or bid Hauptmann to rearrange the play, that it would be transferred into the Third Reich and into their favor. But Hauptmann never changed his plot. He never gave in to another interpretation. Then the Germanist Peter Sprengler made analysis of the life of Hauptmann and analyzed how Hauptmann was interested in Mein Kampf by Hitler, and as well as Nietzsche. For me, this is always something very superficial, and I don't want to give in this talk because Nietzsche is never mentioned in Mein Kampf, and Schopenhauer on the other hand. But okay, so it is a very superficial analogization of this topic, and Breskius pointed out that Hauptmann was a yes-sayer to almost every German political demarcation line, regardless if it was 1914, 1918 or 1933, maybe 1871 as well. So, and let's not forget, the play was written in 1892, in a time long before the Nazi regime occurred in the public sphere. Not so the film. And I want to show the first scene of the film, already with the new music. And then I will tell something about it. And already the naturalistic approach is somehow destabilized, because we are given the characters we will see are portrayed already as animal features. And yes, let's look at here, and then I will tell something about the scene and the music. Scoring of films, the high violence as portraying of suspense, which are opened with a harp glissando, and this harp glissando is, since the opera culture, always a scene opener, so it's very, very illustrative. And then we have a tambour playing something like a reluctant march rhythm, and the march was regarded as a unifying music that also would let join the audience in one unifying feature. But in this case, the tambour is trapped between the other spheres, so it cannot develop his full conviction. And the third sphere is an accordion playing a vague melodic figure based on accordion chords. The accordion is an instrument born in the wrong time and sentenced to be the representative of the low culture. And in this triangle of suspense, profanity, and or reluctant military qualities, there is already something established which is against the most scorings of the time of the silent cinema. Why? I'm in a research process at this time. I don't really know how the music was made in the historic screening of the viewers. What I know is The musician, the composer was Willy Schmidt-Gentner, who was a famous Kapellmeister in Vienna. He conducted many silent films, just like Richard Strauss, and he was member of the NSDAP, but only for 1 year. And the most important thing, he made his music by compiling music. What does compiling music mean? I will show a historic document, not by Willy Schmidt-Gentner, but Hans-Heinrich Transmann's scoring of a film you don't have to remember. And this shows how a film is segmented into the scenes and the scenes and the acts and the acts and the scenes, and every scene is given one music. So we have one mood per one scene, so we have one melodic connotation. Mostly, and this is also what we know, is that Willy Schmidt-Gentner used military marches, he used workers' songs, he used drinkers' songs, he used operetta music, so it had a very commodifying unification quality to it. And the synchronicity of these different spheres in the Kalitzke music of course denies any connotation which would be from the start of the film directing into one direction of meaning. So speaking of unification, one tool always worked in the cinema until today, it is the song. Like in the Weimar Republic Schlager film, or the Neapolitan Sceneggiata, or the American USA vaudeville performances, the singing together with the screen was always very welcome from the audience. And as it occurs, the scene where the workers are convinced to do something against the establishment is a song, the so-called Dreißiger-Lied, and or blood court, Blutgerichte. And I want to show the scene now in the movie and how it's portrayed. Look at I tried, please sorry for my bad translation, I tried to translate the language of Hauptmann into English, so but okay, you will see how interesting the inner titles are made by the same caricaturist who also made the animal features. He tried to visualize language and the aggressiveness of language and the repetition of language into the inner titles. Now let's see and hear. So it is always a repetition. Interesting thing about this music here is the instrumentation and how melodic fragments are mirrored and shadowed into different orchestra parts. Interestingly, so the same composer, Johannes Kalitzke, made another scoring in the year 2016. The film was the silent film Shadows, which advanced even more the shadowing and mirroring of motives. And there is one very special mirroring. It's a little bit silent, I think. There is not only a conventional orchestration, there is also a keyboard which plays speeded up the same patterns as we hear the instruments are playing. I try to extrapolate, listen carefully, you maybe hear the sample of the keyboard. The high tunes was the keyboard. And this is a very interesting comment to what I said about recording reality and the qualities of recording reality, but at the same time manipulating reality. And this comment, I think, is very intriguing. And also, you see here the loops which are created by pushing the keyboard button, and then the pre-recorded sound loops occur. And you see what I mean by motives. The different motives are in the part you see under is a ninth chord plus octave, so it's very short. So the common ear doesn't hear it really, but you have it everywhere in the score. And this is also a comment of the conviction strategy. We are torn into a vortex and we don't even hear it or know it. And it's repeated and repeated and repeated over and over and over again, like we are convinced to join in against the establishment, like the protagonists of the scene are doing. So it's very, this is what I mean with entering into a dialogue on a more intellectual level with the old meanings and the old pictures. And I want to conclude my talk with one of the last scenes of the movie. As I said, the family Hilse, especially the old Hilse, is refusing to give in to the revolutionary activity. And Heinz Wieheller pointed out the Hilses are in transitions excluded from the Christian qualities of the rebels. Christian qualities of the rebels. And at the end of the film, we see a reference to the crucifixion and Golgotha. So this is highly problematic because and this is what I mean with the title, Between Fight for Justice and Imaginations of Violence. This fight against the unjust establishment and the exploitation of the workers is, through the crucifixion scene now, transfigured as a revenge of the Christs, of the Christian culture, and therefore also complicates the situation we know between Christians and Jews. And I want to show this scene, and at the end of the scene the old Hilse is shot through the window by, let's say, friendly fire. Maybe he is judged. Maybe we can speak about what the connotation of the scene could be and how the music is reacting to this. The music silenced. It doesn't want to judge anymore. Thank you very much.
Are there some direct questions to start with? Then let's start maybe with some discussion about different styles of silent music. This was a very new score. There was no real old score for this film. Only.
As I said, I'm right in the investigation process of the old score, and I showed this. Yes, and there is in Munich and in Frankfurt there are big archives of these cue sheets, and maybe I will find the original for this movie. I doubt it somehow, but we know very little about how this music was compiled.
Check the papers as well, because they at that time the trade papers, Filmkurier, Lichtbildbühne, especially Lichtbildbühne, had a strong part on music. They had some special sections on music, reviewing the music separately from the film sometimes, by different writers.
Yes,
so that was a very strong discussion about the music.
Like Katholische Filmdienst and so on. It's very important. This is why we know something about the music. So I was very reluctant to be too precise, because I don't know it until now. But it is very. We can assume that the music was built like this. And it was not original score by Schmidt-Gentner, his own music. He compiled it very likely.
Could you say something more about you talked about the recording and manipulation of reality concerning the keyboard? Because I'm just asking if it makes any sense to think about the different types of signs that Peirce is distinguishing, because the indexical of what I think might be half the recording and manipulation of reality, it has a certain linkage to the indexicality, maybe, which is but often misunderstood in Peirce's philosophy as being like photography, because the indexicality by Peirce, that might be interesting in the recording project, and in this moment if you have the repetition of the keyboard hinting at something, because the pointing finger for Peirce is an index, right? Like or a signpost is an index because it's physical related to what it's actually not only representing but hinting at. So maybe could you elaborate more about this recording and manipulation of reality in terms of maybe also sign or pointing, hinting?
Well, I could, from a musicologist's point of view, maybe it has something to do what we could call truth, or the source of truth, or the source of something, the source of sound in this case. We have to know that recordings and what we call musique concrète, which developed out of a French tradition, led to a philosophy going far back to the ancient culture, to what we call the acousmaten. The acousmates were, I think, the pupils of Aristoteles, I think Aristoteles' pupils, who listened to the teaching but didn't saw the teacher, so they rely only on the voice and only on what they heard. This is the term of musique acousmatique. It was created by Pierre Schaeffer, who was a pioneer of the musique concrète, and this was the philosophical question of materiality, and what is the truth of materiality, and can we judge what we see through our eyes? Is the production of something that what we see, or where does it actually start? And I think it has something to do with what we discussed yesterday, where lies the origin of truth. And on this point of view, I find this remark of indexicality very, very interesting in interconnection with the musical culture and the avant-garde musical culture since 45 or since second Viennese school. Yeah, that's pretty much what I could say now, but maybe you can.
Yes, interesting.
Maybe one remark to truth and the silence we are hearing at the end of this. Susan Sontag said, silence is not the absence of something, but it is the presence of something. And also Rancière said, the absence of truth is not the absence of something, but the absence of information, and truth is something that constitutes society. And again, like I always have the sickness of a musicologist, have to go to musical traditions. The pause, the general pause in music culture, in European music culture, always meant this is Ausrufungszeichen, this is the sign. Now, reflecting on their own art, music is reflecting on its own impact somehow. And in the Eastern culture, the pause is something that echoes what we heard before. So it is a mirroring and echoing and contemplate and continuation of what we are hearing before. And it's not just like a performative tool, like the Kunstpause in the speakers or so. Yes, and this is why I find this scene at the end where everything cumulates and then the music silence. This is a more, I think, intelligent solution than it was in the other score I told you with Metropolis, but I don't want to go further into Metropolis now.
And was Michel Chiot saying, I think it was Chiot saying that sound film invented the silent moment in
yes,
films.
Yes, it was Chiot, yeah.
Shouldn't you take into your research the tradition of the music at the time?
Absolutely.
And in this case, the place that Weber would have been or had at that time, and what music other films like the Weber was, because the Weber was made by Zelnik, who was known for his live entertainment things.
Yes.
It was completely out of his usual stuff.
And the most successful movie of him.
Yeah, and but at the time, I think he tried to get into the what would you call it, the wave of Russian films coming into Germany, and they have their own tradition of music, not from Russia, but from Germany. Like Edmund Meisel was the composer of Battleship Potemkin, and the Battleship Potemkin in Russia was a flop at first, and then it was transferred to Germany, and he made this music to it, which was using kind of machine music as well, building up the ships meeting and so on. So shouldn't that, and other films as well around the time, that they had their own tradition transferred maybe to the Weber as well, as they were done? That's another question we could talk about. Should we now present films like they were, or like we think they were at that time, or should we present silent films now with the music that's nearer to our experience, either pop music or new classical music?
Well, Adorno would answer, we should present movies like they were presented very conveniently. Very conveniently presented, because I have ghostly images don't need ghostly music. The ghostly images and the abstraction of silent film need something to calm you down. This was his philosophy. I don't go with it, but it's a question. I think in Vienna is now some research group which is investigating the combination of avant-garde music happened in the time. At this time, it was Stravinsky, there was Schoenberg, and the question is why didn't the music join in or at least very reluctant join into the abstraction of the movie. Meisel did it a little bit. He recorded the so-called Geräuschschallplatten for the Berlin Symphony of the Metropole.
Yeah, and he had his own Geräuschmaschine
yes,
in the cinema, and even choir that added some other level as well.
And he prepared the piano, quarter-tones. Quarter-tones are until today, even in the avant-garde music, not so well received and respected. So there were some, but
Meisel was kind of avant-garde of music to film at that time, while in the normal cinemas you rather got the songs of the day even.
Yes.
Just picking an idea of, the moon, so they played a song with the moon in the title or something like that.
But we are speaking here about Potemkin, of Berlin Symphony, of the Metropole, about the music. These are the high art. What we see here, this was the common film that was received films that were melodramas and hundreds and hundreds of films, and they were all accompanied by such systems. So maybe one theory could be musical convention developed out of filmic convention. So and these movies in the focus of my interest maybe are per se something different and something special. So. But I want to canonize this.
I think the example of Meisel and the music for Potemkin, or your example that a new music attached decades after the first appearance of the film, is doing something to our discussion from yesterday in terms of nationality of a movie, or something like a national atmosphere or national issues or whatever. Because if you see Meisel is doing something with the music to this Russian film, shown in Germany and imported and exported backwards. So where is this, this nationalizing thing of this is a national film, right? Or is there something national to it when music and sound is doing something to the images which is not the same as any other music? So we have even a new step there in terms of, and that's maybe one of the reasons why this idea of writing a new kind of film history emerged in the 80s in terms of internationalization is rooted in just researching which music was attached to what film in which theater, and which is coming back maybe to the plenary session that morning. The question of your colleague Olga in terms of international, to bring back the notion of national into discussion of film theory, film history, and film studies. Is exactly this question again, where does the nation ends, or who's able to define which nation could lend hand on that movie when you have stuff like a score, for instance, the score to that scenes from this morning. It's an American pop song. Doing something to the images, you know what I mean? This is complexing our problem of we talk about images all the time, but when we talk about sounds and changing sounds over decades and over nations, we have a huge, even bigger problem.
Yes, I am investigating in my dissertation Jacques from Apple Gans as well in the new score, even in a more advanced stadium right now. And in both cases we have we have pacifism, but a very, very different idea of pacifism. The pacifism of the old score, or what we assume was the old score, was a pacifism which defines itself to the borders, to the nationality, to the distinction to the other. And the new pacifism is something that didn't recognize the others. It is a more cosmopolitical understanding of what it means. So it is a huge difference, yes. And mention the music. Music always walks behind cultural fashions in every corner, regardless if it's movie and then avant-garde or impressionism. The paintings occurred in the half century before the musical influence and so on. So it's always a problem.
Yeah, and if we stick to the Potemkin example, the official Soviet release that was prepared in 1947, that's in the depths of Stalinist era, they use big orchestral score and making it pompous.
Yeah.
And not using the more avant-garde Meisel score. Because for them that was now, in 30 years after their revolution, the big film of their birth, kind of the birth of their revolution, and then turning it into a self-gratulatory opera, kind of.
Yeah, and this out of this music, what we call the soundtrack, the classical Hollywood soundtrack, the classical period of Hollywood soundtrack occurred of this late romanticistic big orchestra sound, which is in the music of actual music of Carl Davis. Maybe somebody knows him. Is portrayed, and I didn't recommend it. I'm not a fan from him, but yeah.
Depends.
Yes, please.
Simone?
Yeah, sorry, because I lost at the very beginning of the speech, and maybe I'm a little bit forced with the European, there are.
It was almost a random appearance of music, even in the big orchestra accompaniments in the palaces, because like people like Friedrich Gentner or Hans Heinrich Dransmann, they had their own taste of music, and of course they put the music they liked, and so it has a very random quality of it.
Yeah, and some of the guys who were there studying in Berlin at the avant-garde high school for music, they earned their money by being orchestrators and conductors in the local cinemas there, like Dessau, for instance. He had his own small orchestra. That's a different, as you mentioned, from just the cheap pianist in the little cinema at the corner to the big orchestras in the palaces, and in between there were levels between with orchestras, 13, 14 people, or
ensembles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of this kind of arrangement of music or usage of music, would you say that coming back to yesterday's discussion about the use value of history, you pick the revolution you like, put it in a circumstance you prefer, and then you have your impact. And then somebody can say, but we need different music to it because the impact right now, 20 years later, we need something more because we know the audience, we know the reception, we know our political goal, so we need other music for it. So would you say there is maybe a comparison possible in terms of use value for history or historical events or topics and music attached to something that you think of that is the impact is right for the occasion? Or is that just too broad?
No, I would say so. I would even say also, I mentioned the two forms of pacifism in the case of Jacques, and even if I'm going with some ideas, we have to question everything and question also the decisions of the music the makers and the composers today, and what is the agenda behind the network stations? Why are they putting this in this context now? What is behind it? How much freedom is left to the composer? Or is he so much involved in some plans before he even made his first note? Or does he make his own interpretation? So who does belong the artwork to at the end? This is a very complicated question. Maybe just a short what I thought about the randomness of music in film history, which is somehow opposed to what early theorists thought about movie, like Kuleshov, like Vertov, like Volkonsky, the big Russian theorists, which included everything into the thought of montage. How is movement portrayed on screen? Referring to Delsarte, to Jean-Emile Jacques Dalcroze, this ballet choreograph and rhythm study scholars. And then somehow the music isn't part of it. So I always wonder, why is this not part of it? Why isn't the music an equal parameter of overall film montage and wasn't considered in the first place? And maybe, and this is a very steile these, maybe what they are trying to do now with this sort of music is to equalize the language between pictures and music and make music equally parameter of the overall montage.
Then I just can remind you, when I grew up and when we screened at our university silent films, we screened them silent, because in the 60s it was silent. We didn't have money to do it, and nobody cared for it. And I remember in my first film in 1971, there are clips from silent films, and we didn't put any music underneath it, because at that time it wasn't used.
And how was the impact? How was it received? Positive?
No, no problem. At that time, they didn't expect it to have music with it. That was one of with Napoleon and the big score and so on. That was when everybody expected that. The next thing was there has to be color in the silent films. So everybody was looking for silent. If you go through the old press, I did that. One of my first presentations here in Udine about color in silent film, and I told them, if you go through the trade papers of the time, there is no color mentioned.
No, yes. No.
There was another.
Yes, there was another.
Yeah.
Yes, in this regard, I think that the theory of Edgar Morin, le cinéma ou l'homme imaginaire, is really pertinent, because he pointed out how in the vision of a film in black and white and without music, imaginary in the perception, imaginary works, and you hear the sounds and you see the colors. And maybe it is a contradiction with the assertion of Shion that the music at the cinema found the silence, because even before the people, spectators, perceived silence and the sounds and music just watching images without music. And I have just another little question, a bit aside. If today the theory of Eisenstein of montage vertical is still operational in the debate, or is something that, do you know, it's something dead, something that nobody cares about? I mean, for the musicians, for the composers.
No, it's absolutely, and maybe Eisenstein made his own mistake because he was the one who said, I don't care, should the following generations do what they want with my films and put the music they want to. He was also, you mentioned this synesthetic qualities of visuals and auditive qualities, this synesthetic conversion. He also talked about colors. You see colors in the black and white cinema. You don't need colors. So
you have to paint the picture. You see it.
Well, I'm now investigating, like I said, the Russian theorists very, very detailed, and I'm not with Eisenstein right now, but I think they should be put into the theory discussion again, because what we have in especially in sound studies and film music studies, this is always comes back to a triadic model of music that accomplishes the pictures, music that antagonizes the pictures, and music that is for the picture, that is the mood technique of music. So this is not enough. So we have to go back to the deeper theories of the interconnection of auditive and visual qualities. Yeah.
I have a question. As you are in contact with a lot of those composers who are doing film music now, to silent films, do they care for what was done there, or do they want to do their thing? Sometimes I have the impression that some of them don't care anything about the old practice of composing to film or making music to film. They're just doing their thing.
Well, Philippe Schuller lost his grandfather in Verbün, so he is very connected emotionally to this stuff, and he does care on a very theoretic level also. Bernd Teves, who made the music for Die Gezeichneten bei Dreier, and also to Die Liebe der Journée. It was in September, I think, it was a screening with his score. He also very much theoretized what he's writing and why he's writing. Bernd Schultheis, yes.
Does he reflect back what they did then?
Yes, yes, they do. Especially what the Angestelltenkultur, the culture of the female culture of employment in the Liebe der Journée, he researched very much. And speaking of Bernd Schultheis, he made a movie, new score for Under the Lantern, Unter der Laterne, by Labrecht. And this movie was about, this was based on what I call Schlagerfilm. The movie when you have a shellac plate and then all the people are singing, but he provided in his movie a social critique. So and Bernd Schultheis is very well aware of this connection between the social critique and the amusement scenery. The Krakow was very well describing in the Weimar Republic, and he created a score which is monothematic, circling around this Transmann song Unter der Laterne over and over again. Trink, trink, Brüderlein, trink is the song, and it reminds me of the technique Michael Kamen did with the movie Brazil by Terry Gilliam, where the song Brazil is repeated over and over again like an empty marketing trick to convince you of a life you will never have. So yes, at least the composers I'm talking to, and this is for me the interesting, are reflecting why the films are made in this time and what are the films saying about this time, and not only judging from our perspective of today.
Shall we break?
Yeah. There is no question left, or all the questions are open. Yes, we.